Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and this is a video. I've done several videos on web components before, but I figured I would do a new sort of intro to web components, and that's what this video is going to be. Just sort of a breakdown step by step of how web components work and how to use them in your code. Now, web components allow you to create, well, HTML tags in the same way you do so in React or Vue or Angular, where you create these sort of self-contained pieces of UI. They're very flexible, so if you want to build them to work sort of like Vue or Angular or React, or just kind of create your own flow, you can do so. It's pretty flexible, which means a little bit more work if you just use the base class. I've built some libraries that give you some base classes that have some features out of the box, which you can see videos on: Merced UI, Component Zoo, Basic Element. Just look up any of those. But I'll just show you the basic web features. So I'm going to create a new folder for your webcdiv, create some new files, index.html, and app.js. Let me just close all this other stuff. Okay, in my index.html, I will create some boilerplate stuff and put a script tag and say script app.js. And I always just like to put a defer keyword just in case. And let's do this. Sort of the simplest version of a web component you can make is this: class, create hello world, of course. And basically what it is to create a web component, you can always create a class, and it has to extend the base class HTML element. Okay. Now, what this class does initially is nothing until you actually create a constructor. Okay? And just like any constructor, you have to call super first to invoke the parent constructor. And the simplest way to do something with this is to do this. This dot inner HTML equals h1 hello world. Okay, and then that's it. There you go. You have a thing, and the only thing left to do is to actually bind it to an HTML element. So we do custom elements. That's dot define. This is the function that will take a string that's going to be the HTML tag. So it has to be two words. Hello dash world. It has to have a dash in it. So hello world. And the reason why they did that is so that way you don't accidentally name it the same thing as an existing HTML element. So hello world, and we're going to connect it to the hello world class. So it says anytime we use a HTML tag of hello world, build it based upon the hello world class. Cool. So now I just create hello world, and there we go. Save. Let's go to index. Let's open this up with live server. Let's see, hello world. Control and Control C. I can use this multiple times. Save. Cool. That's the kind of beauty of web components. You create little pieces of UI that you can reuse over and over again. Okay, cool. Now, this isn't particularly exciting. You know, like you can just write hello world. So you generally want to do something a little bit more dynamic. So let's try to mock some features that you're probably used to with other web components. So let's mock like props. Okay, so let's see here. Let's assume that we're going to put a prop here called word. Word equals hello world. Okay, let's do that. So the way this would work, it should be like this dot get attribute, and then here we put in word. I think was the attribute again. Okay, so that's the function that'll get the attribute. Now if you go to one of my libraries, like Basic Element, it already has a function in there that gets all the props, so you don't have to do this one by one. It'll just get all of them and put them in an object, just like it would be in React, except they just all be strings, but still, it's a nice little function. This dot get attribute, so I'm going to assign this to a variable const word equals this, and now I can do this. Let's see here. Let's make this backticks. H1 word slash H1. There we go. Okay, so see, the other ones are null because I didn't pass anything in. So word equals goodbye world, or goodbye. Let's see. Neat. Okay, now that's again still probably not crazy useful. Now let's say I did this. Let's just add to it. Let's add a style tag. Style H1, that should be slash style. And then we're going to put an H1, and an H1 color will be another attribute called color. Okay. So I'm going to say const color equals this dot get attribute. No, not get animations. Get attribute color. Okay, that's cool. So now it should have a color if I, well, first I gotta put the attribute. So color equals blue. See, the problem is that it styles all of them. Okay, so that's one problem with web components out of the get-go. If you keep them part of your open DOM, so they're not part. So basically, since this style applies to all H1s, it's just going to apply to all the H1s. What if I only want to apply to the particular one that's on the screen? Then what I need to do is use what's called a ShadowDOM. ShadowDOM keeps any styling or anything that I do inside it inside its own little world. It creates its own little mini DOM for that component. So in that case, I'm going to want to create a ShadowDOM first. So what I'll do is I'll do this dot attach shadow, and then I pass in a little object that's just called mode, and then usually we just pass in the word open. You never do closed. It's just not a good idea. And it just means that you can see it inside the developer tools inside the element section. So then this becomes no longer this.innerHTML. I don't want to attach it to the normal DOM. I want to attach it to the shadow DOM. So it's this.shadowRoot.innerHTML. So that attaches it to its shadow root, which is this self-contained little thing. So now if I go back and take a look, see the only blue one is the first one. So any styling I do inside this component only applies to the individual instance of the component. So now I can do this. I can be like color equals red, word equals cheese, color green, okay, so that's pretty cool. Okay, so I want to see some of the benefit of this, especially if, like, let's say you build like a whole card or a slider or some sort of really like nice piece of UI. You can make it customizable for every time you use it. That's sort of the benefit of this, because then you can create like a slider that you can customize every time you use it. So let's say it's like a 3-image slider, and what you do is you put the 3 images as props like that, and you put them as URLs inside the tag. You can use that slider over and over again. Okay, cool. Now let's say I included a button in this code. Hello. Cool. Now the button, well, the button doesn't do anything right now. I want to add an event listener. I can't do it in my normal code, because my normal code, if I do it outside of here, it's going to run before the button exists. So what I want to do is kind of not run the attachment of an event listener till this is done rendering to the DOM. So there's a callback, or there's a function that you can override, connected callback. It has to be connected callback. And connected callback runs the minute that the component is rendered. So I can do here, I can just say like this dot shadow root dot query selector, and I'm going to select the button. So I'll select this individual button in this individual instance, and then I can say dot attach add event listener, click, and then say something like event alert and the alert will be like this dot get attribute, and then we'll say alert. So we have to pass in what this thing is going to say. Okay, so that way each one's unique. So now, actually I have to add some attributes. So I can go this one and say alert is hello. I can go to this one and say alert is goodbye. And let's try that out. So I go to the first one, hello, hello, goodbye. See, each one is unique. That is pretty cool. Okay, so moving on. Now, with this, there's more to know. Let's see here. Now, let's go back to app.js. There's also another callback called disconnected callback. Which does the same thing except when the component is removed. Alert. I have been removed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give one of these an ID. We'll just call this target. And what I'm going to do is at the minute that this thing opens, I want to say document dot query selector. I want to select the one that has an ID of target. So document dot query selector target, and I want to, I think I can do just remove. And see, it removes the element, so it says I have been removed. And now there's only 4 left. So that's what disconnected callback runs. It runs if the element is removed from the DOM. Okay? So that's useful. It's mostly used for like cleanup if you need to remove event listeners that are outstanding and whatnot. Cool. So those are a lot of the main features. Now, if you want to create like other functions, you can create all the functions you want on it. So it's a class, so you can have fun with it. Other cool features is slots. So right now, if I were to give this children, so let's see here, I go inside this hello world, and I would put hello world and say, hey, I am a child. Right now we don't see it. Okay, so right now we don't see that in the DOM anywhere, because this has nowhere to display it. So we have to go inside the HTML, we have to put a tag called slot. That's how you know where the children of that custom element will appear. So I'm going to put it right above the button, but right below the H1, slot. Slot. Okay, so now, see right there, it shows up above the button, below the H1. Hey, I am a child of H1. So you can actually create it where you can make wrapper stuff where stuff wraps around for a reason. So like, yeah, that's basically what you can do. You can do slot, and then you can actually make multiple slots that have different properties and different names, and you can target where certain elements show up in the thing. That starts getting a little bit more complicated, but the idea is you can do that. Like I once used that slot feature to create like a styling wrapper component, where basically it wraps around an element and styles the stuff inside of it. It's a thing you can do. And let's just show you in the Elements tab just kind of how this looks at this point. So Elements. So if I go into this first one, so you see it's a shadow root. That means that the ShadowDOM has been turned on. And then I go in there and there's the H1 Hello World right below the shadow root. So inside the shadow root is the elements that are inside the component. But notice that any child, anything that's slotted, isn't considered part of the actual ShadowDOM. So I can't just style it using the ShadowDOM references. So if I want to style it, I have to use, I think there is a pseudo selector. Remember, right, it's like slotted. Let me just do a quick search on it. Slotted slotted pseudo element. Okay, so here we can do what's been slotted. Okay, and that allows me to select specifically ones that have been slotted. Okay, so I can be like here, slotted. I only want to style a slotted H1 that has been slotted. And we'll see this will work in this part. H1 slotted, and then we want, let's say, the color to be green. Oh, that doesn't apply to that one. I think it's because it's still inside the ShadowDOM. But let's see here. Let's put an H1 here. Bob. And then I'll put a style tag here. And then here I'll do the H1 slotted color green. I broke it. Let's see here what we do here. H1 slotted. Oh, let's take a look at the console. We'll take this out. That's where the style tag would take this out, but let's comment this out, see if that fixes it. So that's not what broke it. Is it the H1? Oh, there we go. I just need to refresh. So first let's bring that back up. Go back to the slotted styling. Oh, that's right. I see what we did. Slotted is a function. So I gotta pass in, here we go, H1. Okay. And now let's give this a shot. Still? Or is it supposed to go over here? Might have to go over here. Slotted H1 color green. Okay. Now let's take a look. Still, let's take a look. Constructor, extension element. Style text element, style not text content. You selected slot elements. Great. It's still. I mean, technically, we use it the way we should use it. Slotted span, slotted. Oh, I don't need to put quotation marks. That's why. There we go. And let's take a look. Yay, it works. Okay, cool. So that's how you can style stuff in the ShadowDOM, so that way you can style stuff that's slotted if you wanted to make sort of like a wrapper that styles. But yeah, that's pretty much what a web component can do. I mean, there's ways to create, like, if you wanted to create something like state. Okay, so you could do something like, you would just create the variables here, and then you would, you would create the state here, so I would maybe make a variable called state. And then we'll sit there and say, like, okay, state. Usually this requires sort of 3 parts. So like this, I would like to say like this dot state equals whatever equals an empty object. Then I would create like a function that's called like this dot set state. Here I would just put set state, and this function would just take in new state. And essentially what this would do is update the state, so this dot state equals new state, and then it would run a render function. Oh, VS Code. I just want to write the word render. There we go. And write a render function. Then I would create a render function. And this is the thing that would run, basically create a template. So this dot inner HTML, or in this case, this dot shadow root dot inner HTML equals, and then I would put this there. Okay, and then I usually would create it that it takes in the state. So that way you can use the state for interpolation purposes. Okay, and then I usually would have one for props, because I would put all the props in its own object. So I would pass in state props, and then you would do all that thing, and then basically this would run every time. So every time you run set state to update the state, it would rebuild your component, because it's render function, and I would replace this line of here with this dot render. So that would run the render function, do the initial build of your component, and then rebuild it every time you change this state variable in your code. That essentially recreates state as it works for the most part in React. And then you can, if you want to be fancy, you can create like another function that happens after render. Like I'll do that, like, you know, for resetting up like event listeners, etc. Because if you just set them up in connected callback, it happens the first time when the constructor runs, because that's how connected callback works. It rebuilds the component. I mean, it runs right after the constructors run. But if you want something that's going to run every time, so again re-adding like, you know, the event listener to this button here, I would do this like this after render function inside your render function, which technically you don't have to worry about any of this, because I built all these features in my library basic element or Merced UI or component zoo. These are all features I have built into those base classes, so you have those out of the box. You don't have to like design these features. But the idea is, if you want to, these are just sort of like the design patterns I'll have here. And then there is something I think where you can get all attributes. So it's like const all attributes props equals this dot attributes, and then I want to console log props, and I think it's a little extra work than that, but console log props, because I think it gives you an array. Console log props, or it gives you an iterable props. So document, yeah, so you see you get this named node map, which is an iterable. So what I would want to do is make that an object. So I would do this, and then do a spread operator, and then that should turn it into a props object. But see, it's still not perfect. So this is why I had to create that get props function. Let me see if I remember how I exactly did this. If I remember right, the way I built get props is, what I do is I create an array out of this dot attributes. So that makes the iterable an array. Then I map over it, and then I take each individual prop and I return an object that should just be, let's see here, just remember how these are built out. Let's still console.log this dot attributes so I can inspect it. And let's see, your first one. So usually what I want to do is take the local name, the ID. So I'll say the key. Wait, let me think about that. Actually, what I want to do is return an array with the key in the name. So this prop.local name, that's the key, and then prop dot, I think it's gonna be like prop dot value. So it's complaining. There you go. And then the other property is, I want to say it's value. Here it is, value. Okay. Prop.value, which makes it, okay, which makes this perfect for the function object from entries. So this creates an array that I then pass into object dot from entries. Okay, and that should build out the object. Yep. So see, there you go. Now you have a props object. So there's the name node map that this dot attributes would give you, and then there's a nice props object that you can use for actually like doing stuff. Okay, so that's essentially how you would do that. But again, you don't need to, because there's a get props function in my libraries, Merced UI, all that stuff. And if you want to get my libraries, you can just go to alexmercedcoder.com. Then go here to JS libraries, and then here they are. So the basic one, the basic one, if you really just want those core features, is just go to the basic element. It's just a base class that has those features, so you don't have to worry about all those things. And see, I actually built this page using my web component library, so you can kind of see that I console logged all the different components I created. Okay. Because depending which kind of, I created all sorts of different ways you can create components, so there's all sorts of fun stuff to play with here. But yeah, so hopefully that was a fun tutorial on web components. Have a great day and enjoy. There's a little bit more, but this really kind of gives you the tools to go a long way with web components.